Amanda Parker turned off her alarm at exactly 7 o'clock on a harsh winter morning, just as she always did. It was still dark outside, and the February morning in Michigan was mercilessly cold. She got up carefully so as not to disturb Brian sleeping beside her. Her husband, a senior engineer, had been working late the night before on an urgent code fix. Looks like another long day ahead, Amanda sighed softly as she quietly left the bedroom. Walking down the hallway, she paused at Emma's door. She gently opened it to check on her daughter's sleeping face. 7-year-old Emma was still sound asleep, clutching her doll. Amanda smiled at that innocent sleeping face and quietly closed the door. When she went downstairs, Betty was already in the kitchen. Her mother-in-law was already perfectly groomed and brewing coffee. "Good morning, Amanda," Betty said in a polite voice. "I've made coffee for you." "Thank you, Betty," Amanda replied, making an effort to sound cheerful. Ever since Betty had moved in a year ago after losing her husband, the morning atmosphere in the house had contained a certain tension. Betty, a former high school teacher, excelled at playing the perfect mother-in-law. Neighbors envied Amanda, saying, "What a wonderful mother-in-law you have," but Amanda knew, beneath the surface lurked something cold. "Are you busy today too?" Betty asked, watching Amanda take a sip of coffee. "Yes, the quarterly financial deadline is approaching," Amanda replied. As a financial analyst at a large accounting firm, this time of year was especially busy for her. Betty just nodded slightly and said, "It's almost time for Emma to wake up. I'll wake her and prepare breakfast." "Thank you," Amanda said, though she couldn't help feeling uneasy. Lately, something had been off about Emma. Her daughter, who used to be so lively in the mornings, had become strangely quiet over the past few weeks, especially when around her grandmother. When Amanda returned after showering and changing into her work clothes, Emma was already at the table. But her usual smile was gone, she was just silently stirring her cereal. "Good morning, Emma," Amanda kissed the top of her daughter's head. "Did you sleep well?" Emma just nodded slightly, refusing to make eye contact. "Answer properly, Emma," Betty said in a stern voice. "Your mother is asking you a question." "Yes, I slept well," Emma mumbled in a small voice. Amanda placed her hand gently on her daughter's shoulder and asked, "What are you planning to do today? Anything fun happening at school?" Emma just shrugged her shoulders. "Emma, fix your posture," Betty admonished. "Shrugging like that isn't ladylike." Amanda suppressed the urge to talk back. She wanted to avoid confrontation with her mother-in-law and didn't want to start an argument in the morning. Instead, she turned back to Emma and said gently, "That's okay. You can tell me about school at dinner time." On her way to the front door after finishing her preparations for work, Amanda paused briefly and looked into the living room. Betty was brushing Emma's hair with a stern expression. Emma's face was tense and stiff. Amanda felt a pain in her chest. "I'm heading out," Amanda said to both of them. "Have a good day," Betty responded with a perfect smile. Emma just waved her small hand. There seemed to be something she wanted to say in her eyes, but she remained silent. As soon as she arrived at the office, Amanda was engulfed in waves of work. Numbers, reports, meetings. Even so, in the back of her mind, she was worried about Emma. During her lunch break, she was having lunch with her colleague Carol in the company cafeteria. "Emma's been acting strange lately," Amanda confided while poking at her salad. "She used to be so energetic, but now she's become withdrawn." Carol nodded understandingly. "Did something happen? Is she being bullied at school?" "I don't know," Amanda shrugged. "When I ask her, she just says, nothing." "Kids can be like that sometimes," Carol said. "But maybe, could your mother-in-law have something to do with it?" Amanda was at a loss for words. She had suspected the same thing herself but was afraid to voice it. "Betty, plays the perfect mother-in-law on the surface. But when she's around, the atmosphere in the house gets heavy. I don't have any evidence. Amanda continued. And if I tell Brian, he'll probably just say, respect my mother. Brian was a wonderful husband, but when it came to his mother, he was blind. Betty always played the role of the caring mother and ideal grandmother in front of her son, and Brian never questioned it. That's tough, Carol said sympathetically. But if you're concerned about Emma's changes, you need to find the cause. Amanda nodded. Yes, I'll keep an eye on things a bit longer. Later that afternoon, Amanda's cell phone rang. It was from Emma's school. Mrs. Parker, Emma is in the nurse's office. She doesn't have a fever, but she says she's not feeling well. Amanda became worried and replied, I'll come get her right away. After getting permission to leave early from her boss, she rushed to the school. When she arrived at the nurse's office, Emma was lying on the bed. Her color wasn't bad, but her eyes showed signs of fatigue. What's wrong, Emma? Amanda sat next to her daughter and placed her hand on her forehead. Emma remained silent for a while but eventually said in a small voice, Mom, I just wanted to come home. Amanda hugged her daughter. It's okay. Let's go home together. In the car, Amanda asked Emma again. Is there something worrying you? Did something happen at school? Emma shook her head. No. At home, perhaps. Amanda chose her words carefully. Did something happen with Grandma? A momentary flash of fear appeared in Emma's eyes but quickly disappeared. No. I'm just tired. Amanda didn't pursue it further, but in her heart, she was determined. She would definitely find out what Emma was afraid of. When they arrived home, Betty greeted them with a concerned expression. Oh my, what happened? Are you all right, Emma? She just seems tired, Amanda answered. I'll let her rest in her room. Betty nodded and said, yes, let her rest. I'll bring some tea. That night, after Brian returned home, Amanda tried to share her concerns with her husband. Brian, don't you think Emma's been acting strange lately? She's become quieter than before. Brian shrugged tiredly. Isn't it just growing pains? Kids change. But she seems especially tense around your mother, Amanda said. Brian frowned. Are you suggesting there's something wrong with my mother? Amanda chose her words carefully as she spoke. No, I'm just worried that Emma seems to have something she can't talk about. You sound like you're suspicious of my mother. Brian's voice had a defensive tone. Mom loves Emma, she's just strict. She's from an older generation. Amanda stopped pushing. It seemed better to avoid an argument tonight. You're right, maybe I'm just overthinking things. On a weekday morning, Amanda, who had turned off her alarm at the usual time, was hurriedly getting dressed. She had an important presentation today and was focused on preparation. However, a small cry from Emma's room made her stop in her tracks. Emma. Amanda opened the door and peered in. On the bed, Emma was holding one of her ears, her face contorted. What's wrong? Amanda rushed to Emma's side and placed her hand on her forehead. She didn't seem to have a fever. Mom, my ear feels strange, it hurts, Emma said tearfully. Amanda grew concerned and carefully examined Emma's ear, but couldn't see anything unusual from the outside. However, it was clear from the way her daughter winced in pain that something was not right. How much does it hurt? Amanda asked gently. It hurts a lot, inside. Emma answered in a small voice. Amanda made an immediate decision. I understand. I'm going to take the day off work, and we'll go see a doctor. She quickly took out her phone and contacted her boss. Fortunately, her understanding boss said, family comes first, and agreed to reschedule the presentation for another day. Next, Amanda called the reputable Hopkins ENT clinic in town and was able to get an emergency appointment. "It's going to be okay, Emma. We'll see a doctor right away," Amanda tried to reassure her daughter. Brian had already left for work, and Betty was preparing breakfast. When Amanda explained the situation, Betty looked surprised for a moment but quickly put on a concerned face. "Oh my, that's terrible." "Of course, I'll come with you," Betty said. "Thank you, but it's fine." "I'll take her," Amanda politely declined. For some reason, she felt reluctant to have Betty with them in this situation. Betty slightly furrowed her brow but quickly softened her expression. "I see, all right. But let me know if anything happens." In the car heading to the clinic, Amanda and Emma were unusually silent. Normally, Emma would sing songs or ask questions about the scenery outside, but today was different. She just silently looked out the window. Amanda occasionally glanced at her daughter through the rearview mirror, her heart clenching at the anxious expression on her face. "Emma, is there anything you want to tell me?" Amanda asked gently. Emma just shook her head slightly. When they arrived at the clinic, the waiting room was relatively empty. After checking in and filling out the necessary forms, Emma's name was called almost immediately. "Emma Parker," the nurse called out cheerfully. After being shown to the examination room, Dr. Rogers soon entered. In his mid-50s, Dr. Rogers was known for his mild demeanor and gentle manner, making him particularly popular with children. "Hello, Emma. What seems to be the problem?" Dr. Rogers asked kindly. "My ear hurts," Emma replied in a small voice. "How much does it hurt? When did it start?" The doctor continued his questions calmly. "Since last night." Emma hesitated, glancing briefly at Amanda. "But it got really painful this morning." Dr. Rogers nodded and said, "I understand, let's take a look," as he took out an otoscope. He began carefully examining Emma's ear. During this time, Amanda held her daughter's hand, trying to comfort her. She could feel Emma's small hand trembling in hers. "Let's take a closer look," Dr. Rogers said, taking out a special camera. "With this, we can see inside your ear on the screen. It won't hurt, Emma." Emma obeyed the doctor's instructions without fear. Dr. Rogers pointed the camera into Emma's ear, and the inside of her ear appeared on the monitor. Amanda was watching the monitor but, lacking medical knowledge, couldn't tell what was normal and what wasn't. However, she suddenly noticed Dr. Rogers's expression change. He frowned and stared intently at the monitor. "Is something wrong?" Amanda asked anxiously. Dr. Rogers hesitated for a moment before saying, "Mrs. Parker, could you come over here? There's something I'd like you to see." Amanda, trying to remain calm despite her agitation, told Emma, "I'll be right back," and stood beside the doctor. "Look at this," Dr. Rogers pointed at the monitor. On the monitor, a metallic-looking object was visible deep in Emma's ear. Upon closer inspection, it appeared to be a fragment of an earring. "What is that?" Amanda asked in confusion. Various questions swirled in her mind. How did a piece of an earring get inside Emma's ear? There's a piece of an earring embedded in her ear. Moreover, Dr. Rogers lowered his voice and continued, "This is not in a position where it could have naturally entered. It's highly likely someone deliberately inserted it." Amanda was shocked into silence. A mixture of anger and fear welled up inside her. "No way," she said in a hoarse voice. "Mrs. Parker, we need to approach this situation carefully," Dr. Rogers said, maintaining professional composure. "Has Emma shown any other changes in behavior recently?" Amanda remembered the recent changes in Emma's behavior and felt a tightness in her chest. Her becoming withdrawn, her tension especially when her grandmother was around, it all started to make sense. "Actually, she's become more withdrawn lately." Amanda hesitated. She seems especially anxious when her grandmother is around. Dr. Rogers looked at Amanda with a serious expression. Mrs. Parker, I have a duty to report this. This is, potentially child abuse. Various thoughts whirled in Amanda's mind. Betty, doing this to Emma. She didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was right in front of her eyes. She looked at Emma with trembling hands. Emma was sitting on the bed, watching her mother with an anxious face. Emma, how did this get in your ear? Amanda asked gently. She tried to be as non-threatening as possible. Emma remained silent, shaking her head fearfully. The color of fear was evident in her eyes. Did someone put this in your ear? Amanda asked again. Emma, Mommy won't be angry, please tell me the truth. Emma began to cry and said in a small voice, I can't say. I'll get in trouble. I'm scared. Those words nearly broke Amanda's heart. Dr. Rogers said, let's remove the foreign object first, and carefully extracted the fragment of the earring. He placed the small metal piece on a tray and then checked the condition of Emma's ear. Fortunately, there doesn't appear to be any serious damage. However, there are signs of a mild infection, so I'll prescribe antibiotics, Dr. Rogers explained. After the examination, while Emma was with a nurse getting her medication, Dr. Rogers spoke privately with Amanda. Mrs. Parker, this situation is serious. I have a duty to report it to Child Protective Services, but first, you need to understand what's happening in your home. Amanda nodded. I understand, thank you. I'll get to the bottom of this. Before leaving the examination room, Dr. Rogers told Amanda, this needs to be thoroughly investigated. The child's safety comes first. With her mind in turmoil, Amanda tightly held Emma's hand. As the two left the clinic, their expressions were grave, foreboding the difficulties that lay ahead. In the car on the way home from the clinic, Amanda tried to talk with Emma. She carefully chose her words, trying not to frighten her daughter. Emma, can you tell me? How did that piece of metal get in your ear? Amanda asked gently, glancing at Emma through the rearview mirror. Emma remained silent, staring out the window. She was drawing patterns on the glass with her small finger. Did someone do this? Emma, if someone was mean to you, Mommy will protect you, Amanda coaxed gently. Mommy won't be angry. I just want to know. Emma sighed softly and, after a long silence, whispered, I can't say. I promised. Amanda felt a pang in her heart. Someone was making Emma keep quiet. Betty's image flashed in her mind, but she had no concrete evidence. She needed proof. What kind of promise? Amanda was about to ask, but Emma seemed to have already closed the conversation. She looked back out the window and maintained her silence. When they arrived home, Betty greeted them at the door. With perfectly groomed hair and clothes, she wore a concerned expression. How did it go? What happened? Betty asked Amanda as soon as they crossed the threshold. Emma has inflammation in her ear, and they prescribed medicine, Amanda replied without going into detail. Somehow, she felt reluctant to tell Betty everything. She decided to follow her instincts. Oh, that's terrible. Betty tried to place her hand on Emma's head, but Emma flinched slightly. Betty seemed to notice but said nothing. Emma, go rest in your room for a bit, Amanda told her daughter. I'll bring your medicine later. Emma silently went up the stairs. Watching that small back, Amanda strengthened her resolve. Tonight, when Brian came home, she would tell him everything. That night, when Brian returned home, Amanda called him into the study and told him in detail about what was found in Emma's ear and the doctor's assessment. You're joking, right? Brian said with an expression of disbelief. Someone deliberately putting a fragment of an earring in Emma's ear, that's impossible. That's what the doctor diagnosed, Amanda replied quietly but firmly. Based on the condition of Emma's ear, it wasn't in a position where it could have entered naturally. But who would? Brian started to say, then stopped. A look of understanding dawned in his eyes. You're not suspecting my mother, are you? Amanda exhaled deeply. I'm not saying anything. But think about it, Brian. Emma's recent behavior, how tense she is especially around her grandmother. It's impossible that Mom would hurt Emma, Brian raised his voice. She might be strict, but she loves her granddaughter. There's no way she would do something so terrible. Amanda was disappointed by Brian's reaction, but it was what she had expected. She spent a sleepless night, continuously thinking about how to reveal the truth. The next morning, after dropping Emma off at school, Amanda made plans to leave work early. She asked her colleague Carol to cover the afternoon meeting. Are you okay? Did something happen? Carol asked with concern. It's about Emma, there's something I need to investigate, Amanda answered briefly. She couldn't share the details, but Carol seemed to sense from her friend's intuition that it was a serious matter. I understand. I'll take care of everything, so do what you need to do, Carol said firmly. Amanda first went to Emma's school and met with her teacher, Mrs. Johnson. Have you noticed any changes in Emma? Does she show signs of being threatened by someone? Amanda asked frankly. Mrs. Johnson frowned and thought for a moment. Nothing particularly concerning. She just seems a bit quieter recently. She used to actively raise her hand in class, but that has decreased over the past few weeks. What about her friendships? Amanda inquired further. Those seem unchanged. She still plays normally with other children during breaks, the teacher answered. The information from the school was limited. Amanda next visited Emma's pediatrician to check her recent medical records. There were no abnormalities, but there was a note about introverted tendencies in the recent examination record. Emma used to be a very sociable and active child, but recently she's become a bit introverted, the doctor said. It happens sometimes. However, if it continues, you might want to consult a child psychologist. Amanda followed that suggestion and made an appointment with Dr. Kim, a well-respected child psychologist in the area. She decided to take Emma there directly after school. In Dr. Kim's warm office, Emma was initially tense but soon seemed to adjust to the environment filled with toys and picture books. Emma, you can talk about anything here, Dr. Kim said kindly. I'll keep your secrets. However, even in front of the specialist, Emma remained tight-lipped. She answered simple questions but froze when asked about home or her grandmother. After the session, Dr. Kim told Amanda, we need time to build trust. It's difficult in just one session. But there's something that seems to be frightening her. Amanda resolved to observe the situation at home more closely. She decided to focus particularly on the relationship between Betty and Emma. On the surface, Betty always treated her granddaughter kindly. But what Amanda noticed was the subtle change in Betty's attitude when she was present versus when she was absent. When Amanda was nearby, Betty would gently remind Emma to use please and thank you. However, when Amanda returned from the kitchen, she sometimes found Emma looking anxious. It was clear something was happening, but there was no evidence. Amanda checked her work schedule, wanting to know more about times when she was away from home. Especially Wednesday afternoons, when she regularly went out. During those times, Betty and Emma were alone together. One Wednesday, Amanda made a bold plan. She asked Carol to cover her phone calls during lunch and decided to return home unannounced. She told her colleagues she was going to a lunch meeting with a client and left the office. Amanda, if something serious is happening, you might need help, Carol said worriedly. I'll be fine. I need evidence first, Amanda replied with determination. Amanda parked her car a little distance away and quietly approached the house. She thought what she was doing might be a bit excessive, but Emma's safety was her top priority. When Amanda quietly opened the door, she heard Betty's angry voice from the second floor. It was completely different from her usual gentle tone, cold and harsh. "You know what happens when you don't listen. I'll tell you once more, this is how a lady sits." A chill ran down Amanda's spine. She quietly climbed the stairs and stopped in front of Emma's room. She could hear Emma crying from inside. "Crying won't help. I'm doing this for your own good. If you don't listen, I'll put something in your ear again." Amanda froze in shock. The moment her worst suspicions turned to certainty. Betty had put the fragment of the earring in Emma's ear. Anger and fear threatened to explode within her. She forcefully opened the door and entered the room. Betty was standing in front of Emma, holding an earring in her hand. Emma was trembling with fear, tears streaming down her face. "What are you doing?" Amanda's voice shook with anger. Betty turned around in surprise and immediately changed her demeanor. The speed of this change made Amanda shudder. "Oh, Amanda. I was just teaching Emma proper etiquette." Betty regained her composure and put the earring back in her own ear. "I told you about the earring fragment found in her ear. You put it there, didn't you?" Amanda asked in a quiet but barely contained voice. Betty's face changed color, and she denied it, saying, "What are you talking about? I would never do such a thing." Her eyes showed a flash of fear for a moment, but quickly changed to a defensive expression. Amanda rushed to Emma and embraced her. Emma's small body was trembling. "It's okay now, Emma. Mommy's here." Amanda tried to comfort her daughter. She took out her smartphone from her pocket and activated the recording app. This would be evidence. For Brian, and if necessary, for the authorities. "Emma, can you tell me the truth? Did Grandma put something in your ear?" Emma, through her tears, finally began to speak. "Grandma said she'd punish me if I didn't obey." According to Emma, Betty had been forcing proper ladylike behavior on her for several months, and when she didn't comply, she would receive various punishments. It started with just scolding, but gradually escalated, and recently, when Emma didn't sit properly, part of an earring was inserted into her ear. "It hurt so I cried, then she said if I didn't listen more, she'd push it in deeper," Emma said in a trembling voice. "She said I mustn't tell anyone. If I did, it would make Mommy and Daddy sad." While feeling intense anger, Amanda tried to maintain her composure. She took Emma to another room and said, "Wait here, I'll be right back," before returning to confront Betty. "What you did to Emma is abuse. I want you to leave this house right now," Amanda said resolutely. Betty hardened her attitude. "I'm doing this for her own good. If you coddle her like you do, she'll struggle in the future. Go ahead and tell my son. He understands my parenting methods." Amanda took out her smartphone and started recording. "Then say it again. Tell me that you put the earring in Emma's ear." Betty was momentarily flustered but quickly regained her composure. "Oh, gathering evidence is useless. Brian will never doubt me." "We'll see about that," Amanda said quietly. "Tonight, when Brian comes home, I'll tell him everything. What was found in Emma's ear, and your actions." Betty sneered. "Go ahead. But whose side do you think Brian will take? The mother who raised him? Or the wife who's trying to protect his daughter?" Amanda interrupted. "You don't understand the seriousness of your actions. This could become a legal matter." The color drained from Betty's face. At that moment, Amanda felt she had gained the upper hand. That evening, when Brian returned home, Amanda called him into the study and told him in detail about what was found in Emma's ear and what had happened that day. "You must be joking. Mom would never do such a thing," Brian said in disbelief. "I didn't want to believe it either. But I have a recording." Amanda took out her smartphone and played Betty's voice. The recording included Betty threatening Emma and later admitting that she had used the earring as punishment. Brian lost color in his face and collapsed into a chair. "Is this real?" "Ask Emma yourself," Amanda said quietly. Brian went to Emma's room and talked with his daughter for a long time. When he returned, his face was hardened with sadness and anger. "I need to talk to Mother," he said with resolve. Brian knocked on the door of Betty's room. Amanda insisted on being present, and the three faced each other. "Mom, I need you to explain about the earring fragment found in Emma's ear," Brian said with a serious expression. Betty acted like a different person in front of her son, tearfully denying it. "You're doubting me too." "I only thought of Emma." "I heard the recording, Mom," Brian said quietly. Betty's expression changed completely. She fell silent, and eventually her attitude became defensive. "That child needed discipline. You two are too lenient. In my day. This has nothing to do with the times." Brian raised his voice, which was unusual for him. "There's no justification for hurting a child. Especially your own granddaughter." A heated argument broke out between Betty and Brian. Betty tried to justify her actions, and Brian expressed deep disappointment in his mother's behavior. "I respected you. But to do something like this." Brian held his head in his hands. Amanda calmly intervened. "Betty, your actions constitute abuse. This could potentially become a legal issue." Betty panicked. "Legal? You're not planning to call the police, are you?" "That depends on you," Amanda replied firmly. "Emma's safety is our top priority. As long as you're in this house, Emma isn't safe." Brian exhaled deeply and said, "Mom, I want you to leave by tomorrow." Betty initially resisted but eventually partially admitted to her actions. "I was just being strict. My parents were the same. That's what love is." "That's not love," Brian said sadly. "Love doesn't hurt others. Especially children." Amanda told Betty, "I'll help you find an assisted living facility. But you can't return to this house." Betty finally broke down and cried, "Where will I go?" "We'll figure that out. But right now, Emma's recovery is our top priority," Amanda replied. Before leaving the room, Brian took Amanda's hand and said, "Thank you. For showing me my mother's true face. For protecting Emma." Amanda squeezed her husband's hand back. "We're family. Protecting Emma is only natural." That night, Amanda and Brian went to Emma's room and told her, "Everything's going to be okay now. Grandma won't be here for a while." Relief showed in Emma's eyes, and she seemed truly at ease for the first time. "Really? I won't get scolded anymore." "Never again," Amanda assured her. "Mommy and Daddy will always protect you." Brian hugged Emma and said, "Daddy promises too. I won't let anyone hurt you." Emma fell asleep in her parents' arms, feeling secure for the first time in a long while. After leaving their daughter's room, Amanda and Brian sat facing each other in the living room. "I'm sorry, Amanda. For not believing you about my mother," Brian said in a tired voice. "It's not your fault," Amanda said gently. "What's important is from now on. We need to help Emma's wounds heal together." The two quietly shook hands, making a new resolution. To repair their family bonds and create a home where Emma could once again feel safe and smile. 3 months had passed. The harsh Michigan winter had ended, and as spring sunlight streamed through the windows one morning, Amanda stood in the kitchen with a cup of coffee in hand. The calendar had Emma, psychologist session, circled in red. Today would be the 8th session. Betty had moved to an assisted living facility and had begun seeing a psychiatrist as part of family counseling. The diagnosis revealed that Betty herself had grown up in a strict household, which had deeply influenced her views on child rearing. She had received physical punishment in her childhood and believed that was proper discipline. Emma's ear had completely healed, and she was gradually regaining her former bright personality. Weekly sessions with the child psychologist were helping to heal her emotional wounds. She had suffered from nightmares at first, but recently the night crying had decreased. "Mom, I'm taking a sandwich today." Emma ran to the breakfast table and said energetically. The sparkle had returned to her eyes as she talked about her school field trip. "Okay, I'll put in whatever you like," Amanda replied, gently stroking her daughter's hair. Amanda and Brian's relationship had also changed. Overcoming this crisis had strengthened their bond. Brian had deeply reflected on his mother's actions and now showed trust and gratitude toward Amanda. "If you hadn't come home early that day," Brian often said, "what matters is that we're here now." "That Emma is safe and happy," Amanda always replied. Brian had adjusted his work schedule to spend more time with his family. Following professional advice, he consciously created one-on-one time with Emma to rebuild their trust. Saturday morning walks in the park had become their special time together. On the weekend, they went for a family picnic. The local lakeside park was adorned with spring flowers and bustling with many families. Emma laughed heartily and ran around, something she hadn't done in a long time. "Mom, look." Emma came running with a bouquet of flowers. "Aren't they pretty?" Amanda hugged her daughter and said, "They're beautiful." At that moment, she felt everything was moving in the right direction. Meanwhile, Betty was gradually adapting to life in the facility. She was slowly beginning to understand the gravity of what she had done and was confronting herself through counseling. On the wall of her room hung a picture drawn by Emma. Brian had brought it the previous week. "Will Emma ever forgive me?" Betty asked her counselor. There was regret in her eyes. "Rebuilding trust takes time. But your willingness to change is an important first step," the counselor replied. Betty began writing letters to Emma and Brian. Finding words of apology was difficult, but this was the beginning of her atonement. She paused her writing and gazed out the window. While trying to understand her past actions, she also felt the difficulty of forgiving herself. Amanda didn't harbor resentment toward Betty. After the anger came a desire to understand. She herself sometimes felt the challenges of parenting. The difference was that Amanda sought help and tried to learn. "Someday, if Emma says she's okay with seeing her grandmother, we'll consider it then," Amanda told Brian. They were lying in bed, sharing the end of their day. Brian nodded and replied, "I hope that day comes." He was still in the process of repairing his relationship with his mother. Weekly phone calls and monthly visits were the beginning of their new relationship. That night, as Amanda watched Emma's sleeping face, she thought about their family's journey. They had just begun the long process of repairing damaged relationships, but they were becoming a stronger family that respected each other more than before. And most importantly, Emma could once again feel safe and smile. The next morning, when Amanda woke up, Emma was standing beside her bed. "Good morning, Mom," Emma said brightly. "I'm thinking of writing a letter to Grandma today. Is that okay?" Amanda was surprised but touched by her daughter's strength. "Of course. That's a wonderful idea. Grandma did wrong things, but the teacher said everyone makes mistakes," Emma said with a serious expression. "I'm still angry, but if Grandma changes, I think I might be okay with seeing her someday." As Amanda hugged her daughter, she felt Emma's small hands awkwardly patting her back. Tears welled up in her eyes. The healing journey had just begun, but the light of hope was definitely there.